Hello everyone and welcome to the Battle of White Plains custom multiplayer game, part number 5. What I'm going to do first is flip through the first 16 turns of this game so we can cover everything that has happened in the battle up to this point in the game. And that brings us to turn number 16, which is where we left off in the last episode. That also brings us to the Confederate command meeting. This is the first command meeting that the two sides have had since the 2 p.m. hour, and it is the second to last one they will have in this game. The Confederate command meeting began with Richard Ewell saying that the Yanks are fighting well today. Their artillery is effective, and they are roughly handling some of our men. The day is nearly over though, and we hold the ground we need to. But can our lines continue to hold under fire? Jackson replied that their artillery is effective for sure. Our guns with Stark were left out of the fight as the battle shifted away from them. They are repositioning now. This is going to be a slugging match moving forward, and the side with more firepower on the line will win. There is no more time or room to maneuver, but they do have better ground at present. If my division and Stark can hold, maybe Hill can renew his attack on the Federal right flank. I don't know if he has enough men, but Hill will have a hard time defending where he is. Maybe attacking is the best option. I am in favor of an attack by Hill against the enemy right flank. We may unhinge their position and relieve the growing pressure against Midway by forcing them to move men to their right flank. A.P. Hill responded that, I have roughly 7,000 men. Based on what I am up against, is this possible? If we have a decent chance, then let's go with it. If this is a long shot, then maybe we slowly withdraw and live to fight another day. Jackson replied that, I think it can be done if you hit the far right of their line. Ewell will cover Midway and allow you to bring as much of your division as possible against their right flank. And that was the end of the Confederate command meeting, so they are opting to be really aggressive here with their moves. And this really is a very aggressive move to make at this stage of the game. There's not that many turns left, and the Confederates are opting to go on an offensive really against part of the enemy line that is hidden in the woods, and they can't really see all the forces that are there. So they're taking a big gamble here. What they are betting on is that the best defense is a good offense. And if they can successfully attack the Federal right flank, they believe it will increase the odds of them being able to hold the 3 objectives circled there in red. Whichever side holds the majority of objectives at the end of the battle wins the battle. However, when you begin to look at the numbers, you can kind of see that this is probably not going to end very well for A.P. Hill. Richard Ewell has about 6,100 men protecting the Midway area in the center of the map, while Stark has about 6,000 men over on his flank. Meanwhile, A.P. Hill has 7,000 men, and he's going to be attacking away from the other 2 divisions and towards the southwest. Now, the Confederates don't know what they're up against, of course, but when you fill in the Federal positions, this is what everyone is up against. A.P. Hill does have the same number of men as King's division, but King has a better position. His men are in the woods, while A.P. Hill's men are spread out over a much larger area. Richard Ewell has a concentrated division there around Midway, but he is suffering a lot of losses as he's taken fire from both Reynolds' division and Sykes and Ricketts' division to the north of his area. Meanwhile, Stark's division has been pretty quiet in this battle up to this point. They've taken the fewest losses, and there's really not a lot going on their particular part of the battlefield. This plan at this stage in the battle just seems like a really long shot to be successful. I don't believe A.P. Hill can even remotely successfully attack King's division, and even if they do, there's no reason for the Federals to worry about it. The best case scenario for the Confederates is they push back King's division, but to what end? They're too far away from the Federal-held Brooks Corner in the far west to make a serious run at capturing that. So the Federals, even if disaster strikes on their right flank, they simply aren't going to worry about it. They're going to let the Confederates move as many men as they want, as far away from Midway as they can, and that just improves their chances there to capture that objective. Was falling back the right option here? That's what A.P. Hill was advocating for. He argued it would be better to fall back on Midway and White Plains and defend a stronger line, rather than attacking with his division against an enemy flank of unknown strength. Personally, I would have opted to fall back and consolidate, and then hope the enemy made a mistake and suffered a bloody repulse. The Confederates already have the objectives they need, they just need to hold them. For the Federals, they're forced to eventually go on the offensive if they want to win this battle. So, me personally, I would have made the more conservative move here. But everyone is different, and we're going to see how this turns out for the Confederates. Switching over to the Union command meeting now. I'm just going to sum it all up by saying that there was a lot of discussion on the Union side about what their next move should be. They wanted to attack, but the question was where and how strongly to attack and in what places. General Ricketts came up with a plan that was eventually adopted. Now is the time we must attack the rebel center at Midway. They have multiple disrupted units and are still moving guns around, and are not yet fully ready or secure in that location. We should attack with my forces and Reynolds. King should continue his pressure as well. So Ricketts is advocating that his forces turn to the southwest and begin attacking in that direction. Rather than going towards White Plains, he wants to put maximum pressure on the objective there at Midway. And let's actually go ahead and zoom in on that part of the battlefield there around Midway. Here you can see that Reynolds has about 5,700 men, and Sykes and Ricketts combined have about 12,000. If they change their facing and begin to attack to the southwest towards Midway, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Confederates in that area. And they're also going to get fire coming from two different directions, which is going to make holding it much more challenging. The eventual Federal attack would fall hardest on the rebel salient north of Midway. By striking here, it was hoped that it would cause numerous routes and begin to throw back and weaken the Confederate lines around Midway. In my opinion, the Federals definitely made the right decision here. With the Confederates tightly packed into a small area around Midway between these two larger Federal forces, attacking in this direction and in this style just makes perfect sense. If they can get lucky, get some Confederate routes, close that salient, it's going to be really hard for the Confederates to hold Midway moving forward. Alright, let's get back to the battle itself, and let's see how all this plays out. This is the way the battlefield looked at the end of the previous turn number 16, and we're going to move forward now to turn number 17, which is the first one after the command meetings. And strong Federal attacks on the Confederates north of Midway have actually routed a few of the Confederate units and driven them back towards that objective. As I said, the Federals wanted to close that salient, and they are doing that with some strong attacks north of Midway. The Confederate plan to attack with A.P. Hill's division is already an impossibility, as the Federals have driven hard against Midway, and they've also overlapped A.P. Hill's left flank. Even before A.P. Hill could get his attack going, it's already out the window. So that is an unfortunate move there, and I'm really interested to see what happens now. Because you have to wonder, what will the Confederate leaders do? Will A.P. Hill realize that his left is already overlapped, and there's just no real way for him to launch a successful attack? Will he try it anyway, or will he fall back? Will he just continue to somehow fight against heavier and increasing odds? We're just going to have to wait and find out. Moving forward now to turn number 18, and the Federal attacks have continued, but they are not rushing it. They are staying back in a lot of instances and letting their artillery do the heavy work. They have higher ground and they have better artillery positions, and this has taken a toll on the Confederates around Midway. And the question I asked before about what will the Confederate leaders do? Well, it appears they are consolidating as best they can around Midway. But can A.P. Hill hold much longer on the Confederate left flank? What began last turn as a Confederate offensive on that part of the map has now turned into a major Confederate problem. A.P. Hill is going to have his hands full trying to hold that area of the map. An offensive, that is completely out the window already. Let's actually zoom in just on that part of the map there around A.P. Hill's division and Midway. And the fighting is heaviest in the south between Hill and King's divisions. King's division struck hardest, and they're really pouring it into the Confederates on the left flank of the rebel army. And the more pressure they put on them, the harder it's going to be for A.P. Hill to stand up to it. And if he begins to fall back, it's just going to put that much more pressure on Midway and White Plains. Zooming back now to the overhead map, we're going to go ahead and move to turn number 19. And the Confederate cavalry actually did something pretty aggressive. They attacked at Brooks Corner, but they were easily repulsed by the Federals holding the streets of the town. It was a risky attack to make in the first place, but I think the Confederates just decided if they got lucky, maybe the Federals would rout. Unfortunately, they did not. Meanwhile, heavy fighting continues as the Federals are pushing A.P. Hill back on the left. Hill is just making no progress, and he's having a really hard time stopping the Federals from wrapping around his own left flank. He's got some units that are routed, and unless he gets lucky here, things are going to go really poorly for A.P. Hill over the next hour. With casualties quickly mounting, the situation is just growing more serious for the Confederates, really on all fronts. I believe A.P. Hill must fall back immediately, or the Federals will just completely turn the left flank of the Confederate forces. Not only that, but at Midway, the Federals are making serious gains and are driving the Confederates back. The Confederates need to find a way to stop the Federal offensive, or at least put pressure on them themselves and force the Federals to do something differently. As it is right now, it seems like all the momentum is on the Federal side. Moving now to turn number 20, and A.P. Hill has fallen back on the left, as I was thinking he should, and I was kind of hoping that he would. But the Yankees are pursuing him. King is not letting go, and he's continuing his attack on the Confederates. He knows he has them at a disadvantage. But perhaps the more important and interesting thing is that Stark's division is attacking on the opposite flank, and they are forcing the Federals to limber up a lot of their guns and move back as their flank was weakened in order to attack Midway. This is very interesting as it forces the Yankees to limber up their guns and will reduce their firepower on Midway itself, and on the Confederate line in general. The effects of this are very important. The Confederates around Midway were just taking a beating from the Federal guns north of their position. But now, all those guns are limbered up and moving away because of the aggressive move by Stark. That's really going to change things at Midway itself. The Confederates are going to have a chance to catch their breath and to reform their lines and get their units back to where they want them. Meanwhile, for the Federals, losing all that firepower is really going to affect how they take Midway later in this game. So Stark attacking here at the right time and forcing the Federals back, that is a critical and very smart move to make from the Confederate side. And as I said, the Federal momentum that they had just 1 or 2 turns ago now seems stalled, though King continues to cause serious problems for A.P. Hill on the Confederate flank. There's also a possibility that Reynolds and Sykes have opted to discontinue their attack in the hope that they can just continue to wear down the Confederates around Midway with their artillery before launching one final large attack just before dusk to capture that objective. Moving forward now to turn number 21 in the game, let's go ahead and just zoom in on the central part of the battlefield. Stark's division continues their heavy attack on the Federal left flank and are now bending them back completely. The Federal artillery continues to be limbered up and searching for better positions. The attack began just here a few turns ago and has already forced the Federals to limber up, like I said, and move all their guns and men back away from the Federal left flank. And this really has greatly relieved the pressure on the Midway area, which was being hit from multiple sides by enemy artillery fire. On the Federal right flank, King's division suffered heavy routing and have lost their momentum at present. They just had a bad luck turn and lost nearly an entire brigade to being routed. They will need to regroup before renewing their attack. This is going to give the Confederates another breather, so things are all going in the Confederate direction at this particular moment. But as you've seen over the last few turns, that can change really, really quick in this game. So zooming back out now, we're going to flip to turn number 22. And the two sides continue to put pressure on the right flank of the opposing army. King is trying the best he can to continue to drive back the left flank of the Confederate army in AP Hill, while Stark is driving back the Federal left flank and putting pressure on them there. There was the second leader casualty in this turn. George Meade was shot and killed during this part of the battle, and that is the second Federal leader to fall so far in the fighting. The action around Midway has turned into a stalemate, but the longer it goes, the more the Federal position on higher ground pays dividends for them. There's still 6 turns left in this game, and I'm not really sure how much longer the Confederates can continue to take the losses that they are around Midway. When they fire back at the Federals, because they're on higher ground, they just aren't doing a lot of damage. It feels pretty one-sided on that part of the battlefield. All of that now brings us to the 6 p.m. turn, which means it's time for us to take a break and the two sides to have their final command meetings. But all that's going to happen in the next video. Right now, let's take a look at the losses for the two sides. As you can see, the Confederates have lost a total of 4,990 men, and the Federals 4,444. The Federals have lost 3 guns and the Confederates 15. Looking at the two sides, you can see that AP Hill's division has suffered the heaviest, already losing more than 1/3 of their manpower. The Federal divisions have each lost about 15% of their men. Ewell's division has lost about 23.5% of their total. Meanwhile, you can see that Stark's division has taken just under 7% losses. This means that the Confederates still have thousands of relatively fresh men to commit to this battle. But can they get those men to the right places at the right time in the amount of turns left? That's going to be an important question. If these men can reach the Midway area and factor into the fighting, it's going to be hard for the Federals to push them back. But as it is right now, Stark's division is out on the Confederate flank and not in a position to help at Midway. This is going to be something to watch moving forward. Looking at the point losses, as you recall, the Confederates have a point loss limit of 3,900 and the Federals 4,500. If either side crosses their point limit before the game time expires, they automatically lose the battle. Right now, the Confederates have reached 2,279 points. They are 58% of the way to their loss limit. The Federals have reached 1,844 points and are 41% of the way to their loss limit of 4,500. As you can just quickly tell by looking at this graph, if the losses continue at their current rate for the Confederates, they're going to have a hard time getting through turn number 28 without crossing their loss limit. So it's going to be important for them to find ways to limit their losses over the final 2 hours of game time. Alright everybody, thank you for watching. I appreciate it as always. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. If you want to check out the American Civil War Gaming Club, you can go to acwgc.net to find out more information about us. Until next time everybody, just remember, keep gaming.